We're now live, Chair.
Great, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Haug. I am the chair of this committee. I would like to welcome you all to the South Area Committee taking place on the 28th of November at 7 p.m. I have received apologies from Councillor Page-Croft, and I think Councillor Dryden has sent his apologies via Councillor Ashton. Otherwise, I will now roll call councillors alphabetically to ensure they are present. City councillors are Councillor Ashton.
Yes, sir.
Councillor Davies.
Good evening, Chair.
Councillor Flaubert. I think she will come later. Councillor Lee. Councillor Levine.
Good evening, Chair.
Hello. And Councillor McPherson.
This evening, loud and clear, Chair.
So can we. And County Councillor Beckett.
Good evening, Chair.
Councillor Goodlife.
Good evening, Chair.
Hello. And Councillor Slatter.
Good evening.
The officers permanently at the table are Area Committee Lead Officer Dave Prinsep, Head of Property Services. Committee Manager is James Goddard, and the meeting producer is Boris Herzog. And for the last item on the agenda, the GCP consultation, we will have Mr. Blake, the GCP Transport Director. At the moment, I'm not aware of anyone else who's going to attend, but we will come to that item later. And other officers and public speakers will join us throughout the meeting and will be introduced at the appropriate time. If anyone has problems hearing me throughout the meeting, then please alert me either by waving your hand or by typing in the chat function. Some housekeeping. Copies of the agenda can be found on the City Council's website. Please keep yourselves muted and only speak when I allow you to do so. If you would like to ask a question, you can speak in the chat function, and we will then read, or we will let you ask a question. If you can, please refer to a specific page number or item on the agenda. This meeting is being recorded and actually broadcast live via the Council's website. Public speakers are reminded that by speaking and appearing in this meeting, you are giving consent to being recorded. And the process for each agenda item will be quite straightforward. The relevant officer will give a brief introduction or summary of the report. Councillors and members of the public are then invited to speak or to ask questions. They can do so in the chat function or make themselves known to the chair. And the committee manager will check Democratic Services email inbox regularly to see whether there are any additional questions there. I may call a short break. We will see how it goes. This meeting may be a bit longer than other meetings, so we can see if we want a break at any point in time. If there are no immediate comments or questions on that, then we can move on to agenda item 2, which is declarations of interest. Would anyone like to declare any conflicts of interest? This does not seem to be the case. Okay, noted, Councillor Davies. We will be patient. We will move on to agenda item 3 then, which is the notes of the 5th of September meeting. Please let me know if there are any concerns about that. I mean, please remember, because we are online, this is a non-decision making meeting, so we can only note the notes rather than approve any minutes. Okay, I can't see anyone raising their hand, so I guess that means we are happy with the notes, which means we can move on to agenda item 4. Could the committee note the actions detailed in the committee notes from September and provide the committee manager with any further updates outside of the meeting? Actually, okay, there is an item. Councillor Davies asked about Fitzwilliam Road. I've tried to get an update from Councillor Flaubert. I don't think, yeah, unfortunately, she's not here right now. Councillor Davies, do you have any updates or any further questions there?
No, Chair, nothing on that point. One item on the minutes about the public art, though. I'm slightly confused by the response about the Nine Wells wooden sculpture. The officer response after the meeting says that the public art.
Okay. There we go. She has warned us before, so now she's gone. I don't know if it makes sense to wait for her to come back, or can you actually hear her? Because for me, Councillor Davies is frozen and mute.
Sorry, I don't know how much of that you heard.
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay, nothing. It's going to be a long night. There's a comment on page 8 from the officer responding to the public art question, and this says in particular that the public art on Nine Wells has been intentionally made to weather and erode over time, and I'm quite surprised by that response. And I'm wondering if the comment which
Okay, I mean, my suggestion in this case is that Councillor Davies takes this up with the officer and maybe gets in touch with the committee manager to update the minutes accordingly if anything needs updating. Sorry, Councillor Davies, we couldn't really hear anything again. So my suggestion would be that you get in touch with the corresponding officer, and maybe you can get in touch with the committee manager to update the minutes if that's necessary.
okay, thank you. I'll do that.
And now, okay. Okay, where were we? I mean, there is another item about the biomedical campus, and I think we've decided, because today's the GCP will visit us, or is visiting us, to maybe get another update in one of the next meetings, which I can coordinate, of course, with members of this committee. In that case, if I don't hear anything else from members of the committee, we can move on to item 5, which is the open forum. At the moment, I'm only aware of questions that have been submitted by email by Mr. Karpen. I mean, I don't think he's present. And I also think the questions are not South area specific and are more for addressed at the GCP, or more relevant to the GCP item at the end of this meeting. So I think we can maybe wait for later then. Okay, but maybe just asking once again, are there any further questions in the open forum? Has anyone questions on behalf of residents? Councillor Ashton, please.
Thank you, Chair. No, I'd just like to point out that since the meetings have gone online, we seem to have lost our residents asking questions. That might be a good thing for us. It might be a bad thing. But I think it's not doing people any favours online for open questions. We seem to be losing traction with them. So maybe we need to just do some more engagement with our residents to point out that, you know, these committees for them to come and speak out, to speak to the councillors. I know we do our own ward work as well. But it seems a pity that if the residents aren't coming to these meetings, we can talk about these ourselves and save 2.5 hours where we could be doing other things as well. So I think we just need to make a note that we're not getting the questions that really we should be getting from our residents, and how do we tackle that, and how do we go forward in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, it is a bit paradoxical. I mean, having these meetings online should make it easier for residents to attend and ask questions, but seems to have the opposite effect. Although I only joined this business relatively recently, I don't remember the time when these meetings were in person. Yeah, okay, let's indeed make a note of that. Are there any further comments or questions, either on this point or? Yeah, I think we will cover this under the GCP item. I see. Okay, yeah, Mr. Goddard, would you like to speak? Yes, I mean, I take your point that this particular question would be relevant in this forum. I mean, has anyone had time? Everybody had time to read it. Would anyone like to answer? I mean, I'm afraid I haven't considered alternatives for the SO 106 funding, but people with more experience who've been around for longer might have experience with different schemes or different ideas.
I do apologize. Where is the
Yes, please. Yes, please. I don't know. There are still people here who haven't got access to the chat. Yeah. Yes, please. If you don't mind reading it out.
I would like to see form.
Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing more on this particular part, and there's nothing in the Democratic Services mailbox, then I can only say,
no question.
Yeah, and thank you. That was a brief but good discussion. And we can move on to agenda item 6, which is the environmental report. So,
Councillor
Wendy.
McPherson's got his Councillor McPherson's got his hand up, Chair.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Sorry, Councillor McPherson.
Yeah, that's okay, Chair. I do it all the time when I'm chairing, so don't worry about it.
I've noticed.
All I'm going to say, I'll let you get away with that one. All I was going to say was that I think most often that members of the public don't even know what a 106 contribution is anyway. So it would be, I think the first step would be to make that more available, to make that more public, that these grants are, we'll call them a grant for now, are in fact available, can be available for various works within the community. But most people, when you mention it to them, they don't even know what it is anyway. So I think some work has to be done by us, by the council, to make it much more accessible and understandable, so that various organisations can apply for those. And we could start with we could all start with our whatever our local communities and whatever our ongoing projects are, churches, all sorts of things. Food hubs is a good place to just advertise what 106 is actually about and give people an opportunity to understand it, and therefore maybe perhaps we'll have a better take up on it.
Okay, that's noted. Any further comments on this particular point? And if not, then thank you very much again for the contributions. And now we can move on to agenda item 6. Is Wendy Johnston ready to introduce this item? So Wendy is the Community Engagement and Enforcement Manager.
Yes, I am, Chair. Thank you.
Good evening, Wendy. Please,
Good evening.
the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm bringing to the South Area Committee the environmental report for the period of June to November 2022. The report's quite comprehensive, so I'll just draw out a few key points, and then I'm happy to take any questions, if that's okay. So within Cherry Hinton, we've been doing quite a lot of work with the community engagement team at Cherry Hinton Hall. We've had what we call green teams, where we do works around literally green stuff, which could be vegetation, tree works, weeding, anything really. We've had quite a lot of interesting groups throughout the 6-month period. And in fact, we had a corporate group who came and did some work around the large old oak tree and removed a lot of the overgrown thistles and but stuff that needed cutting back. Apologies, but on page 16 of the report, it should say 16 volunteers, not 166. We also had Community Payback working with us again. They are now back up and running to full speed, so we are having them several days a week operating across the whole city. In the past 6 months, they've done quite a bit of work in the Cherry Hinton area, including sort of pavement edging, where they cut the pavement back to allow wider access, which is something that doesn't get done by any other teams or departments. And they've done quite a bit of work around weeds as well, on the path edges, which is positive to see. We have had a problem with burnt out motorbikes around the Coldham's Business Park Norman Way area. We've had 3 motorcycles burnt out during October and November. No evidence has been gathered so far as to who is responsible, but that's an ongoing investigation. Within Queen Edith, we have had our Sunday volunteer litter picking groups running, where we organise locations for our volunteers with a time and date, and they can get together and undertake litter picking in the area. I find that's quite good for volunteers to be able to meet like-minded people in the wards. We also had the clean-up day at Wolston Way. We were really happy that we were able to help support that again, and looking forward to doing that again next year. In Trumpington, we've got quite a bit of tree works planned for the recreation ground, which will be open to volunteers. We're currently in the tree planting season, which roughly runs November to February, when trees are dormant. That's when we do most of our planting with the tree team. We have had quite a bit of fly tipping within Trumpington itself at recycling centres. Byron Square was the hotspot. Obviously, that site's now been closed because it was being overly abused. The current problem is at Glebe Farm Drive Recycling Centre. I have put in an application for a redeployable CCTV camera to be positioned there, and I'm awaiting feedback from the antisocial behaviour team as to whether that's successful. And obviously, if that is, we'll be able to use any intelligence from that to help tackle the problem of fly tipping at that ward. The only other thing to draw your attention to is the needle fines on page 29 of the report. We note there's 51 needles for this period, which covers a large fine in Cherry Hinton. Just to confirm, that was besides one of the flats, it was one self-contained deposit of needles that appeared to have been part of a fly tip. There was no patterns as to needle fines in the ward at all. I believe that was a one-off situation. That's a very brief summary. After speaking to Councillor Slatter as well via email, I do also have an update on the food waste collection trial as well. I have that as a Word document, which is an A4 page. I don't want to read that out because it's quite lengthy. I'm quite happy if I can send that on to James to circulate to the committee, if that would be okay. But other than that, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions there might be. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your hard work. And especially, I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, so fly tipping at the moment is unfortunately quite fashionable around Trumpington. So thank you very much for looking into that. I'm really, I hope we can maybe get CCTV to work and at least show the perpetrator that we are on the case. But are there any other comments or questions? I can see that Councillor Slatter has her hand up.
Yes, thank you also, Wendy, for a very clear report as usual. Indeed, the Glebe Farm are clearly doing what you can. My theory is that the new style of recycling bins is more inviting for people to just make contributions to. I mean, some people are obviously in good faith putting clothes and things by there that they think other people can use. It's almost as if we've got a bit of a sort of garage sale going on. I'm not saying that explains all of it. It doesn't. Obviously, some people are just plain dumping. And if we can indeed use that mobile camera, that will be brilliant. The volunteer groups and the community payback in terms of improving litter picking and that sort of thing. We have several places in Trumpington, as you know, that aren't quite handed over yet. Baker Lane, Linear Park is one where we would love to get some tree planting in. And the residents are being well engaged and talking to David Mallier. Perhaps I can get that onto your radar as well, Wendy. The allotment site, similarly, although it seemed to me a good place to have community payback in cooperation with the community garden next door, the officers involved with the allotments weren't sure that that really was working. Again, I think it's over to officers. Maybe I could just revive that without causing problems. But I mean, there's a lot of paths that need weeding to avoid the use of herbicide. And that is something that, although we do use Duke of Edinburgh volunteers for, it is a bit tedious, and we'd like to give them some variety, naturally enough. But otherwise, thank you very much indeed, and we look forward to the next clean-up day, whenever we manage to find out when it is. Thank you.
More questions or comments to Wendy? Because I also noted, I mean, it's now possible to cycle and walk up and down Trumpington Road without encountering too much encroaching vegetation. So I think it's clearly been cut back quite efficiently. So hopefully this should be sorted until earlier next year. I mean, I would still just like to encourage your team to make sure that it stays sort of as short as it can be throughout the whole year. Because last year we had issues at some point with the footpath in particular, close to the hedges completely being overgrown, and people had to, move into the cycle lane there. But at the moment it looks fantastic. Are there any further questions and comments to Wendy? Okay, there's one in the chat. Okay, a compliment from Councillor Macpherson. So members of the public or anyone else can, of course, post comments or questions in the chat. Has anything been submitted to the Democratic Services little mailbox, email box? And Councillor, is that a new hand? Okay.
It is indeed. Simply before Wendy goes, to say that in terms of the officers coming, having online area committees is good because it takes them away from home much less. And we will still hope to get more public participation. But I just thought that is a point in terms of our officers dragging them out of an evening for just a few minutes. I always felt in person it was not a good way of spending their time. So, but it's good to see you anyway, and Wendy.
Yes, of course, one could think about hybrid arrangements for officers as well as the public. But yeah, I think it's also about advertising, how we advertise it. Obviously, we've tried our best on social media and we tell residents constantly about it. But, well, if they don't show up, yeah, you can bring a horse to the water. Okay. In that case, thank you very much for this discussion, especially to Wendy, of course. And we can move on to item 7, which is the Environmental Improvement Programme. And I believe we are joined by James Ogle, Project Officer, and in fact, John Richards, Public Realm Engineering and Project Delivery Team Leader. Hello. So is it only? Oh yeah, both of you. Okay. Hello. Great of you to join us. So who would like to start?
I'll start, Chair, if that's okay, and thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. As I say, my name is John Richards, and I sit within the Streets and Open Spaces team of Environment Services at the City Council, and I've been the lead officer for environmental improvements for probably 8 years now. And I've been ably assisted this time round by my colleague James Ogle, who has done a lot of the background administrative work on our programme over the last couple of years. So, Chair, I'm struggling a bit with a sore throat and cough, so please bear with me this evening. But I'm conscious as well that it's some time since we brought a paper on environmental improvements to area committees. So there are a few members on South Area that I don't know and haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet. So hopefully we'll get to do that at some point. But just to give you a bit of background, environmental improvements has been a programme that's been running at the City Council for many, many years, certainly more than 10 years, and is really about developing and delivering meaningful improvements to streets and open spaces, largely with the public realm estate rather than private areas, although we don't preclude work in private areas if it has a sort of a broader public or community benefit. So the programme has had periodic review over the years. Most recently last year in 2021, when we undertook a review and we benchmarked what we did against other authorities up and down the country. And I think the good news is that we actually came out of that quite well. But we have made some adaptations in the light of what we learned from other authorities. And one of those adaptations is to actually try and be more engaged with communities and inviting scheme suggestions and submissions. So we've moved this time round to using the new platform that the City Council has adopted for public engagement and consultations, which is called Citizens Lab. And this has enabled us to reach out directly to members of the public, and also for members of the public to see what has been submitted by other people online, and to effectively give a thumbs up or thumbs down as to whether they think the suggestion is a good idea or not. So that there are a few changes to the way the reports are presented from previous years. The only other thing, well, a couple of things actually, Chair, to mention. I apologise, there is an error in the report. Paragraphs 3.1 and 3.3 are contradictory. And just to confirm what we did in 2019, when we undertook a review, we established a new strategic element of EIP funding to address problems that were occurring in all areas across the city, and also there was a good fit between those of the council. So we still have a local area pot as well, and in fact it's the local area pot that is £100,000 per annum, divided between the 4 areas in proportion to the local population. And South Area Committee's share this year is about £25,000 of that. So you've got about a quarter. That has increased in the last couple of years, particularly in South Area and West Central, because of the new developments in places like Clay Farm and also Eddington. So those 2 areas are again getting a slightly larger proportion. And we have £70,000 each year for schemes that meet the eligibility criteria for the strategic block. So we established that. It was approved by the Executive Council following environment scrutiny in 2019. And we've been operating on that basis since, and have invited bids again this time round on the same basis. Chair, we've only had a small number of bids come forward in South Area, and I was very interested by the discussion a few moments ago about trying to be a bit more proactive about inviting community bids. The reference there was to Section 106 bids, but it does seem as though we perhaps have a similar sort of issue in South Area, and I'm aware, and those councillors who've been around some time, I think, are probably aware that in previous years, South Area hasn't always used its full area allocation each year, and we've tried to sort of tinker with the sort of the arrangements to try and be a bit more flexible and enable projects to come forward. But the other areas, all of the other areas across Cambridge, are actually oversubscribed, so they've got more local area bids than they've got funding to support this year. So we've presented in the report, Chair, the schemes as they've been received on Citizens Lab, with some officer narrative and comment in there. So we've done a desk-based assessment, but because of timelines, I would really impress that this hasn't been done in a huge amount of detail. So it's very much a sort of a first sift, if you like, and we've tried to rate the suggestions that have come forward in terms of their ease of development and delivery. So we've applied a sort of a red, amber, green flag to them. And I think, fortunately, those that have come forward for South Area, we all consider should be relatively straightforward to develop and deliver. We are now able to put some further resource towards catching up the backlog with previous commitments of environmental improvements, and also moving on to the new programme. So Unfortunately, when COVID hit, the resource impacts from that, both financially and also in terms of staff resources, meant that we had to prioritise other areas of work. So delivery has continued, but it hasn't been to the same level as it has been in previous years. So we've actually got a bit of catching up to do before we can actually really start delivering on the new programme. So again, I think I would just impress a word of caution there in terms of managing expectations in communities, Chair, that you know, we some of these schemes we might be able to pick up quite quickly, particularly where we can link them with other work that's already happening and group work together. But others might need to wait until some resource becomes available in 2023. So that's really where we are, Chair. So I think at that point, I'll happily pause for any questions that members might have or points of clarification, unless James wants to add anything.
No, not really. I mean, we rated the 3 projects that are being put forward as green. Possibly if there was more competition, we might have gone, oh, maybe that's not going to be so deliverable, or it's not really going to have the environmental impact that this other one will. So we might put that green amber. However, obviously it's not an issue for this area. So I suppose we're opening up for discussion now to the councillors if they're happy to agree the 3 that we put forward. And I suppose, is there anything else you want from EIP going forward?
Just to add to that, sorry, Chair, if I may just come in again, what I didn't mention was that the decision, because the area committees are now being held online, you can't make decisions in the same way as you did previously when meeting in person, which I'm sure you're aware of. So the decisions on these schemes actually now need to be made by the Executive Councillor. But you as area committee members are able to make recommendations to the Executive Councillor, and we will take those recommendations that come forward this evening, along with those from the other areas when we meet with the Executive Councillor in early December. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's open for discussion. I mean, just a quick thought I had, since we also talked about low attendance, and I've just seen it's also been picked up on Twitter already. I mean, I guess we could go more strongly involve resident associations in the South Area Committee, at least advertise the meetings there more strongly. I guess that's maybe at least one way to get to the people who have probably the strongest interest in the issues we are talking about here. Okay, that's just a comment. So I didn't quite. I think it was Councillor Ashton first.
No, it was Councillor Macpherson, Chair.
That's okay, no problem. You go ahead, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, John, it'd be good to know where we are with past schemes that haven't yet been finalised. As you pointed out, I think sometimes we get lost in so many schemes and we lose track of what was agreed, what was being implemented. So it would be good if we could have some kind of easy chart to say these are the schemes that are still ongoing in the South area and where we are with them, so we know we haven't lost any through the cracks. And secondly, I did put 2 schemes forward, but I seem to be not backing them because it was underspent. I thought those 2 schemes were quite easy, and I can't understand why the hanging baskets can't be put back in Cherryington, especially with the climate change and biodiversity, and we're underspent at the moment. And again, the notice board on the wreck, which we've done in other areas in Cherryington. So 2 straightforward schemes that wouldn't be expensive. And I take your point, we can't make decisions tonight because we're online. It can only be recommendations, but I like those recommendations maybe to be noted by the Executive Councillor to find out whether or not that they can go forward. Thank you.
Okay, I think now it's Councillor Macpherson then.
Okay, thanks for that, Chair. I'm trying to put the camera back on, but it's not happening. Oh, there we go. Yeah, thanks for that, Chair. Well, I had 3 questions. Mark's asked 2 of them. So that just leaves me with 1, which is fine. And it's about him, actually. I'd like to just have a couple of words about the Royal British Legion area memorial here in Cherryhinton. There's a strong RBL contingent here in Cherryhinton, and I'd like to say while we're on that Mark's done a tremendous amount of work It was in a real state. It looked absolutely awful. And Mark spent a lot of time and a lot of his own personal finance in replanting that area. So I'd like to put on record that, in fact, the ward's thanks to him for doing that. But not only that, two parts to this. One, I'm sort of informed that for some reason, I'm not sure why, that Mark can't get reimbursed for those outlays, which I'm a bit surprised about. But two, what are we going to do in the future? I'd like to put that on the agenda for next time, that ward councillors shouldn't really be in a position to have to spend their own finances. Time, okay, we're okay with that. Well, you know, we don't mind going to do what we can, but I'd like to see some EIP recognition for the Royal British Legion area in Cherry Hinton.
Would anyone like to respond to that directly, or?
Chair, would you like me to respond to both of those questions?
If you, yeah, if you would like to, yes.
So, yes, I mean, in terms of previous schemes, I think we've put a link in the paper to a page on the City Council's website that gives some narrative about where we are with the existing scheme programme. So I'd encourage members to have a look at that. If you have a look at that and actually have further questions, then by all means get in touch directly, either through emailing projectdevelopment@cambridge.gov.uk or James or I directly. In terms of the two suggestions, and I think one was notice boards, Cherry Hinton Rec and possibly the War Memorial. And as those members who've been with us some while will remember, we did an enhancement of the War Memorial outside Cherry Hinton Rec many years ago, which was part Section 106 and I think part EIP funded. So EIP has supported that in the past. I think what I would stress is that EIP funding is capital, it's not revenue. So it can't easily be used for running repairs, cleaning, those sorts of things. It's about infrastructure or asset enhancement. So I think things like notice boards and those sorts of things we can do, or if there's any further sort of enhancement that's needed to sort of the structure, if you like, of what's there. The reason we haven't put it on the list is we were unable to ascertain exactly what was being asked for. But clearly, you know, you have funding available. So if there is something that meets the eligibility criteria, I wouldn't want to rule it out if members were still supportive of that going forward for further consideration. So I would urge you to have a think about that. In terms of hanging baskets, I think the capital cost or the upfront cost of providing hanging baskets is only a very, very small proportion of providing them through the summer months. And the decision that was taken, I think, in 2019 was on the basis of revenue cost pressures in terms of, you know, regular watering and those sorts of things. And also, you know, we're in a climate emergency. We're all trying to save water. And that decision was based on, you know, a very sound rationale. And, you know, we are at the current time not able to entertain any further requests for hanging baskets, either through EIP or in any other funding forum. So I think, Chair, that probably, I think I probably responded to Councillor McPherson's question as well at the same time about the War Memorial. If we can get some more information on that, then very happy to have a look at it.
I suppose I sort of confirm
Please.
that again, really, regarding the notice boards. If we have a little bit more information, understanding what the notice boards are, it could have been brought forward, or even this committee could recommend that it is brought forward to add on to the current 3 projects. It could be a 4th project quite reasonably easily if that's a recommendation of the board. It was just the issue was it didn't follow the application process. There was no detail, so we didn't really know what we could put forward. So a little bit of detail, and yeah, it wouldn't be an issue. I wouldn't have thought. I mean, because it's not going to be that expensive, depending on what it is. Exactly.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we can move on to the next question. I think it was Councillor Slater and then Councillor Davies. I mean, Councillor Ashton, do you still have your hand up, or is it a new question? So you're muted.
Yeah, it just clarifying. I did mention about the notice board. It's an information board. We put one on a giant's grave, which tells people all about it. So this was an information board on Cherrington Wreck to point out how that was came about. That the wreck is actually the memorial ground. So people are aware that that's a memorial ground and not just a playground as well. So it would be an information board like we've done in other parts of the city. So a straightforward scheme to go around. And then going back on the hanging baskets, I think this is where, again, it ties in with S106. If we're not careful, we build up people's expectations as to what they can have. So we need to be very precise about what these bids can actually do. Otherwise, we will get hundreds, which we've had in the past, as John knows in his 8 years of experience. We will have hundreds of applications in to sift through, where probably 90% of them aren't eligible. So what we want to try and do is make sure the ones that go in meet the criteria to begin with, almost, which saves officers time and getting the things delivered on time as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you all. Councillor Slatter.
Thank you. Yes, bit of a bundle. Following up on what's been drawn to our attention, I think it's maybe the mayoral contingent on this meeting. The proper upkeep, the respectful upkeep of war memorials is something that should almost, I think, be a citywide duty. Now, we're lucky in Trumpington that we've got an Eric Gill sort of sculpture that has attracted attention and a considerable investment from outside because of its nature. Other places are far more easily overgrown and get untidy. Take your point that it mustn't be a revenue type obligation, but maybe something that the City Council as a whole needs to keep an eye on, because I think it's judging by there is a lot of support for the British Legion this year, massive collections at Waitrose in Trumpington. I think more people are aware of the debt we owe, and the war memorials, although to the past, are an important symbol. So maybe that's a duty, for the city as a whole to consider and snaffle somebody else's budget a bit on the quiet, maybe. On back to the environmental improvements, you'll have noticed we've got one in for drinking fountains, thanks to Councillor Levine. If we are in any way wanting to address some unspent funds, and I'm hoping these stay in South area, just because this I assume can be a bit of a rolling programme, then it may well be that some guidance on where and how drinking fountains can be done. I'm delighted to see there's green on it, but it could well be that there are economies of scale in officer time, if not in actually purchase, that there may be locations that other councillors from other wards on this call might well think, oh yes, we could do with one, because that is something that is going to be increasingly welcome by the public with hotter temperatures coming up in the summers. So just maybe if that could be, we could learn from that one, please. And also that would hopefully avoid inappropriate applications where there's no water supply of an appropriate nature, for example. The fact that these are online, and so we can't make the more dramatic decisions we used to make in the old days, that Russ and I would be vying for funds, but were terribly civilized and always made sure everybody's ward got a look in. But that was all done in public arena. I would be unhappy if the executive councillor had to make that final decision. It's a bit of a democratic loss to my mind. I don't think it's a conspiracy, but if there could perhaps be a reconvening of the online meeting of interested councillors, I would want to make sure that everybody had a chance to fight their corner. That's just a gentle suggestion. And thank you. That's quite enough from a county councillor who probably shouldn't be here. Thank you.
Is that, would you like to respond, or is that?
Yes, Chair, I'll do that.
Sure.
Now,
yeah,
if it suits the agenda. Yes, in fact, Councillor Satter, you'll remember that we enhanced the War Memorial at Trumpington at the same time as the Cherry Hinton one in around 2015. and actually put it in a much nicer setting, did some work, additional work to it with drainage, sort of suds work, and added an additional name of somebody who hadn't previously been recognised on it. And we've used revenue funds actually in the last couple of years to clean and enhance the main war memorial in Cambridge on the junction of Station Road and Hills Road. So you know, if it's capital improvements, yes, EIP is potentially a source of funding, as is Section 106 going forward. In terms of drinking water fountains, so this is something that the previous executive councillor, Councillor Katie Thornborough, was very supportive of. And what we did in the first year of EIP was to introduce a number of new locations in open spaces, largely fed from existing water supplies from existing council maintained buildings. So community centres, pavilions, those sorts of things. Which is a much more cost-effective way of both funding the sort of the infrastructure improvements that are needed from day one, and also ensuring or continuing to ensure that the water supply is fit for public consumption. The one that we've got sort of some distance away from any buildings in the middle of Parker's Piece has been a bit more of a challenge to sort of keep in operating order. So that's the learning we've had so far, and so I'm very pleased that this particular request that's come forward does feature a community centre, and you know I'll be very keen to sort of look at that one if that's the wish of the committee and the executive councillor. In terms, Councillor Slatter, of your opportunity to have direct engagement with the executive councillor, which I think is what you were suggesting, whilst we're not proposing to convene a sort of a formal meeting or anything like that, I would suggest that you're perfectly at liberty to contact the executive councillor and press the case for any particular schemes that you wish to support. The executive councillor may well even be listening in on this meeting this evening. I know she was for the West Central Area Committee meeting that James and I attended last week. She was just keen to hear the discussion. So that may be the case today. So yes, I think that would be the best advice I could give there, Chair.
Can I come back?
Councillor Slatter, you want to follow up?
Well, yes, I'm not happy about it just be a matter of us contributing, because what we found when we were all in the same room is we would hear one another's arguments and sometimes actually sit back sideways and say, well, actually, that's a good point. And I think that's probably a better way of spending the money if there is competition for it. So it is hearing one another's views that I'm after, particularly. And then obviously it is down to Councillor Collis, who will need to do it in person on paper. But it's more the exchange of views as we're getting at the moment, which is just councillors on the whole here today. It's that exchange at the time of the decision making I wouldn't want to see go. I don't know what other councillors think.
Yes, thank you very much. I think Councillor Davies would like to try again.
I would. I'll keep my camera off. Apologies for that. So, John, two questions. Firstly, what will happen to the current £18,000 underspend for South Area? You just mentioned in your answer to Councillor Slatter some reference to a rolling scheme. I mean, for me, it would make much more sense if this were properly configured as a rolling scheme, because I think people come up with ideas throughout the year and see places with fresh eyes as other changes happen. So the idea that people have to bid once a year and that's their only opportunity probably stifles public input and creativity. And my second question really is about the format of the scheme as a whole. I mean, you've just explained that it's about capital expenditure rather than revenue expenditure. But I wonder if the fact that these are quite small sums we're talking about mean that sort of suppresses public interest and engagement, because either they don't understand what could be achieved for these relatively small sums, or they have much more ambitious ideas for their areas, and this does not offer a means of getting those delivered. I am very interested in the lack of engagement with this scheme. Queen Edith residents, I think certainly it's the ward I can speak on behalf of. They're pretty well engaged, and so then I would imagine there is something about the parameters of this scheme which are not encouraging people to come forward with ideas.
Chair, would you like me to
respond?
To respond? Can I come to Councillor Slatter's point before Councillor Davies, which is just the purpose of this evening's meeting is really to have that discussion, okay, amongst councillors and any other members of the public who wish to join, express an interest to do so. But that's the purpose for you as a group of local elected representatives to discuss the merits of each of the schemes and agree those that you would like to see go forward for report to the executive councillor. And James and I attended both North and West Central last week, and those areas have prioritised those schemes which they want to see go forward. There was a lot of questions. We had a lot of scrutiny about the ones that weren't able to be included, but that is the situation. So that's the purpose of having this two-stage process. Chair, Councillor Davies's question. I mean, as I say, we're trying to keep the way we operate EIP under sort of continual review. So I think if there is any way that we are able to engage better with communities and get ideas coming forward, we'd certainly want to look at that. But I would just remind members that in the other 3 areas of Cambridge, we have had more requests than we have funding available. So we seem to be reaching people in those areas. We just don't seem to be in South. In terms of any savings, in years gone by, members will remember that we did have a true rolling programme, and we were able to roll forward or rephase capital funds that weren't used 1 year into the next year to keep the pot going, and then we top it up with new contributions the following year. Councils, including the City Council, are in a very different position now financially for both capital funding and revenue funding, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to hold on to and roll forward funds, particularly where they're not committed to specific improvements. So, I will only have any chance of being able to make a case to council if I'm able to say that we have a list of projects waiting to be completed that we haven't been able to get to yet for staffing resources or other reasons, technical difficulties, but they are real important commitments locally, and members want to roll forward the funding to enable those to proceed in a future year. I don't think we're in a situation any longer that we can roll forward funds. What would happen to the funding if we're not able to do that? I'm not entirely certain. One of the things that we are asking all areas to consider is to have some reserve schemes, such that if the executive councillor feels minded to use some of the underspend in one particular area to support undertaking a larger programme in another area where they have schemes awaiting to be delivered, then that may be something that she would wish to do. There would be some rationale to doing that. Equally, the funding could be returned back to the capital pot, and it could be used to try to help with the sort of capital pressures that the council has at year end. So at this stage, Chair, I really don't have an answer for that, but I think it would probably be along either of those lines.
Thank you very much.
Chair, can I just come back very quickly?
Oh, yeah. Yes, please.
So the first thing I would say is that there is an annual event in Queen Edith, our Greener Queen Edith event, which is extremely well attended by residents, but it doesn't fit your timing. So this year, the application process opened on the 21st of September, closed on the 28th of October. Our original date for it was going to be, I think, the 10th of September, and then because of the death of the Queen, we rescheduled for early November. But that's a missing opportunity to gather suggestions from a very engaged group of residents. Is there a way that we can be compiling this through the year to feed in, or that as I said, the applications can be received and adjudicated on through the year, just to keep some kind of momentum to it? That would seem quite valuable to me. And the second thing, and John, I appreciate that this is not a problem of your making, so I won't ask you to respond, but for myself, I find it quite infuriating that what I'm hearing is there's a possibility money that isn't spent in this year will be subsumed back into general council revenues. Residents in Queen Edith have been waiting for 7 years for the delivery of the pavilion in Nightingale Park. It is the 7th anniversary of that decision on the 14th of December. And it seems that there is a great haste to take money out of the areas and substantial delay in putting investment back in. And I would hope that we can cling on to this remaining 18 grand and determine some uses for it in our areas for ourselves rather than having to kiss goodbye to it.
Chair, would you like me to respond?
Yes. Oh, yes, please.
But very briefly, because I'm conscious of time and that you've got the GCP item to follow. So
yes,
yes, I you know, Councillor, we hear what you're saying, and you know, we have made some adaptations this time round to the operating process, but some other councils across the country do. Well, actually, they deliver both capital and revenue improvements through programs that they call environmental improvements. And particularly for the revenue side, they do deliberately take applications through the year. Because ours is capital and we have limited resource, we've chosen not to do that this time, but it could well be something that we look at in the future. Of course, the council also offers other ways of undertaking that type of work. The report that you just heard of from Wendy Johnson is a good case in point, and we're hoping that actually in terms of some of the applications that we've had coming forward across the city for environmental improvements, a lot of the work, particularly sort of biodiversity and sort of wildflower grassing schemes, could be delivered by Wendy and her communities team. The other thing is the community grants program that the council offers for events and those sorts of things. So I think, you know, whilst EIP capital might not be ideally suited to those sorts of aspirations, there are hopefully other things that could perhaps be looked at. In terms of the Nightingale Rec, I think that's Section 106 funded, and I think I'm not entirely sure about the situation, whether there's a funding pressure there or whether there are technical difficulties, and that would be the reason why it might not have gone forward. But I would imagine that my colleagues Tim Weatherfield or Ian Ross could probably give you an update on that, Councillor. But it's not something that I think would fall within the sort of typical operating practice of EIP, just because of the high costs involved. You know, 25,000 for one particular area doesn't actually stretch very far. We've had a debate before, Councillor Davis, as well, about the estimates that we put in being a bit on the high side. And what I would say is, as I said to you previously, that if we can deliver them for less, and particularly if we're working with communities, and communities can undertake a lot of that legwork at no direct cost to the council, there is a saving there that could potentially be put towards, you know, other enhancements. Sorry, my voice is gone, Chair.
I think, yeah, I think I mean, I'll have the last two questions now. I mean, if I could encourage, you know, the questioner and answerer to be brief, so that we can get to the GCP item, which I had sort of in mind for around 8 o'clock. That's Councillor Ashton, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's harping back to one of Councillor Slatter's points as well, that we all remember the days of the bum fights for this funding, where we had wards fighting each other because they thought it was they should have instead of the other. Now, surely in this day and age with democracy, we should split that money between the 3 wards. So straight away, each ward knows they've got X amount of money to spend on their project. And that way around, you can then get on a scheme that you know you can actually do and deliver. And then coming back to Councillor Davis's point, you know, 1 year, if you're not spending it all, you've got some more money to come in the next year. So hopefully then we get the schemes we want, rather than have to do schemes that we really didn't want, but we want to use this money up, otherwise we lose it. So for democracy and being seen to be equal, why can't we just say that's the money for each ward? And when we talk about what other councils do, I know the councils give their councillors £5,000 a year for their wards as well to spend spend on improvements, and the councillor can decide what he does. So if you've got 3 councillors in a ward, they've got £15,000 to pick on the scheme. So we should be able to do a lot better on these EIPs to stop expectations, which gives these officers, and I'm not knocking the officers, they're doing an amazing amount of work, but they have to flush out so much of what is not possible, when we should be trying to say, let's take that away to begin with. Let's make life a bit easier for everybody. Thank you.
I mean, I think maybe we can have a quick question then from Councillor Flaubert.
Good evening. Actually, it's not a question. It's just that when I joined, you were talking about item 2, and I just didn't want to interrupt. So before we finish today, maybe we can resolve to talk about this item or this question again in our next meeting, since we don't have the time. But I could just briefly give you an update very quickly about this. Basically, this work of art dependent on the developers' wishes, because the planning the planning went through, I mean, just when I joined the council. So there was no possibility to make the developers use the art of work back in the building. It was impossible to find a museum to keep the work of art as well. And through reading the papers, I just noticed that there was this possibility to have a proposal for maintenance, which I wasn't given at the time of this inquiry. So I proposed to basically go through back again in the next meeting. So possibly I will have a better answer, because the idea was that the developers were going to let us know when the work of art was going to be available, and then we needed to find a place where to keep it, and that was very difficult to find. Also at the time, I mean, because the boundaries have changed so many times, basically that didn't belong to Trumpington anymore, but to Petersfield, if I remember correctly. So there is a couple of things that maybe we should be considering, and it would be worth to talk about this in our next meeting, Chair.
Yeah, we can keep that in mind. You could also maybe send a response to James Goddard, so he can put that in the minutes as a response to the previous item. Would anyone like to briefly comment on that right now? I mean, Councillor Ashton, your hand is still up.
Sorry, Chair, just being lazy. I'll put it down.
Okay, because I mean, if we have reached the end of this discussion, if everybody agrees, then I can thank everybody for joining and for contributing here. I think that was yeah, a great discussion. Quite a few ideas, of course, to take forward in the future. And especially thank you to John and James for joining us and providing us with all this information and answering our questions. So this means now almost punctually at 8 o'clock, we can move on to agenda item 8, which is the GCP Making Connections consultation. Would Peter Blake, please? Yes. Oh, hello. Thank you very much for joining us and for bearing with us. So are you going to introduce the item then?
Yes, good evening, Chair. Good evening, committee. I've got a few slides I was going to take you through. If you're content, I'll just get them up. I'm going to canter through them quite quickly, so we've got time for question and answers at the end, if that's okay.
That's okay with me.
Can everybody see that?
Not yet. Yes.
Yep. Okay, right. So I'm going to go through these quite quickly, but maybe any issues we can pick up in question and answers. So Greater Cambridge Partnership City deal was signed back in 2014 now to reflect the challenges that Cambridge and Greater Cambridge has, being a growing area. And we know that in terms of the traffic, transportation, the real problems that we face with congestion, the issues around poor air and air quality, particularly in central locations, and increasingly the contribution that transport causes to carbon and the carbon challenge that we face. And these challenges are only going to get far more pronounced as the area continues to grow, with 44,000 more jobs and 32,000 more homes in the current local plan, let alone the emerging local plan that you are considering in other forums. As many of you committee members will be aware, the Greater Cambridge Partnership is engaged in delivering a variety of schemes already. So we're progressing plans for new busways, significant additional capacity at park and ride and travel hub sites, greenway cycling routes. We're on the ground at the moment in Milton Road, and a variety of other infrastructure projects across our area that focus on sustainable transport to meet the challenges that we face. We have been talking around the city environment, though, and what to do there for the last 3 or 4 years. So initial consultation was 2017. We've had a further 2 consultations. We've had a citizens' assembly, and at the end of last year, consultation really focusing on, is there support for the targets of reducing carbon, of tackling pollution and congestion? And as you can see from the slide, significant support for those aims, significant support for improving the public transport and the bus offer, along with the idea of reducing traffic to improve walking and cycling across the city environment. So we are currently out to a consultation at the moment that is proposing 3 key things: transform bus network, significant investment in improvements in sustainable and active travel across the city, and then the method by which we achieve both of those things is a sustainable travel zone, a charging zone for vehicles coming into the city at certain times of the day and certain days of the week. And so just to unpack that a little bit, we are looking broadly at doubling the size of the bus operation across a much wider geography than just the city. So we're looking at going out to St Neots and Newmarket, March, Chatteris, to Royston and Saffron Walden. Significant improvements in the city environment, up to 8 buses an hour on the main routes, £1 flat fare anywhere in the city, far more environmental sort of sensitive electric vehicles and reduced emissions, orbital routes, more direct services to the key traffic generators around the biomedical campus, the science park and the West Cambridge site, rather than dragging everybody into the city. And then significantly additional extensions to the operating hours. So we are suggesting 5 a.m. in the morning to 1 a.m. 7 days a week, and perhaps more at the weekend. So significant improvements required to public transport, and we've put a whole massive detail around those public transport improvements, and we look forward to hearing people's comments as part of the consultation. So the second phase is investing more in active travel modes within the city. As many of you committee members will know, we are a very car-dominated city environment. We need to manage a reduction in cars and then give more space to people. We are a cycling city, and actually some of our cycling provision and infrastructure is really quite poor. So we have an irony of we're delivering Greenways network, a segregated cycle network from the villages of South Cambridge to the edge of the city, and we don't have the space in the city environment to have segregated cycle routes across the city. And so the proposals respond to that, along with things like far more secure cycle parking, improvements in public space, car clubs, EV charging and the like. So that's the second theme of the consultation that we want to hear people's views on. And then the final theme is the one that tends to capture the media's imagination, which is a charging sustainable travel zone. So we are suggesting that the urban area of Cambridge becomes a charging zone weekdays, 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. with a variety of charges depending on the types of vehicles. But that all of the money generated is then ring-fenced and reinvested in those public transport, walking and cycling improvements. So this area would have a sustainable revenue stream. Interested in your previous debate, you're talking about revenue. So this would be a sustainable revenue stream of £50 million a year to invest in those improvements. As I said, £5 for cars, that would perhaps increase for LGVs and HGVs, all part of the consultation, and we look forward to hearing people's views. And as part of the proposals, we have quite a series of discounts, exemptions and reimbursements based in large part on other schemes. So London, Birmingham, Bath that have been doing this now for a number of years, but particularly reflecting some of our circumstances. So we're suggesting that blue badge holders would be able to nominate 2 vehicles to get 100% discount. And then people on lower incomes, maybe linked to council tax benefits, again, getting discounts on the any charges. And then working with NHS, social care and charity providers for discounts and reimbursement schemes to make sure their operations aren't impacted. If we did this, and you've got to do all three elements, not just the charge, it's not just the public transport, it's the active travel as well. What we would see across the city environment is a reduction in traffic of about 50%. As I said, we would generate a significant revenue source that would be reinvested, ring-fenced and reinvested in those public transport, walking and cycling improvements. Public transport usage would increase 40% in the city, 30% across that much wider geography, and again, significant additional journeys by bike and by foot associated with that. At every stage we've discussed this, the civic leaders have been absolutely clear that the public transport improvements need to come first. So with this indicative timeline, I've got on the left-hand side, our consultation runs to the 23rd of December. We may, with county council colleagues, be in a position, say by the middle of 2023, to take a decision. And if we took a decision to go forward, then by the end of 2023, we could start a programme of ramping up improvements in public transport. Likely to start with the reduction in fares, £1 in the city, £2 anywhere across that geography, just because it's actually the easiest thing to deliver. And then over the next 3 or 4 years, recruiting more drivers, getting more electric vehicles, getting more charging capacities, additional depots. So those services are ramped up in advance of any charge coming in 27, 28. My final slide, Chair, and that's just a plea to get involved. Thank you again for having me this evening. All the information's online, lots of events in person, and maybe I'll take the slides down and try and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Peter, for the very comprehensive presentation. And I open the floor to questions and comments.
Are we having the public questions first? I think it's only fair.
Yes, we do actually have Mr. Goddard. I mean, I've also forwarded you an email which I've just received. I don't know if I don't think Democratic Services was CC'd in, but we could start with Mr. Carpen's email, which came first. And I wonder if it's easiest to maybe start with question number 1 and copy it into the chat for everybody to read. I'm also maybe we can look at the, or maybe we can ask Peter to see which ones he can answer most quickly. I mean, it's quite a lot. And there are 2 more questions from another resident.
I'm happy to have a go at all of them, Chair, if it helps. So we are not hiding our light under a bushel on this extensive advertising campaign, newspapers, libraries, leaflets, rail station park and ride sites, buses, online and media. So there's a massive information there. You can't pick up a local newspaper in our area at the moment without hearing about this. We've been on the local radio, and that's going to continue for the next 3 or 4 weeks as we continue with the programme. In terms of the question 3, and what are their plans or contingency plans? Look, we're in the middle of a public consultation. It's a 10-week consultation. I think it's entirely appropriate that we get through the 10 weeks. we pull together all the views, we analyze, we review, and then we take forward on an appropriate structured basis decisions and considerations in that approach. So that is the plan. We're going to continue with this consultation. We will analyze, we'll pull together, and then decision makers will take a view on what people say. You know, we're not going to blow the whistle at half time. There's another 3 or 4 weeks still to go on that. In terms of freight, the freight question, we've had previous discussions on freight consolidation, whether we should be looking at more electric vehicles for freight with local businesses and stakeholders, and those conversations will continue, irrespective of what happens with this consultation. Then clearly anything we can do around freight, making it more streamlined and less impactful on our environment is incredibly important. And then I think the final question was around retrofitting the city deal with the climate emergency. Well, actually, the city deal started, it was very much focused on growth and congestion. And actually, 2 or 3 years ago, the city deal board extended that scope to very much to include climate as being one of the key objectives, and so the examples the questioner gives around cycleways and sort of reallocating road space is exactly what we're undertaking. So we've delivered the Chisholm Trail, the Histon Road scheme. As I said, we're on site with Milton Road, which is about promoting more walking, cycling, public transport. We've got a Greenways network, Cycling Plus, and the details of all of those schemes are on the website, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think you've covered indeed everything. Very well done. Is there any immediate comment on any of this? Otherwise, my suggestion would be to read or to present the question that was sent in by email by Mr. Stephen Lovelock. James, do you have it on your screen, or should I just read the questions?
Would you please read it, Chair? I don't have it.
Yeah, I mean, I forwarded it to Democratic Services, but anyway. So question 1 is, what other chargeable areas and funding models has GCP explored aside from what is laid out in the current proposal? And then there is a slightly longer email about the background to this question. I mean, it's basically highlighting that some people just have to drive a few hundred meters to reach the M11, for example, and get charged for that, even though they don't necessarily contribute to the problems that we are talking about. And a fairer funding model might be an increase, I mean, partly an increase in council tax, I mean, it's just a suggestion here, and at the same time, a smaller sustainable travel zone, a smaller zone for congestion charging. So that is what the resident proposes here. So what kind of alternative funding models have been considered?
Thank you, Chair. As I tried to allude in my presentation, we've been looking at this for the last 3 or 4 years. And so at previous stages, we've looked at other options for delivering that. So the option around whether you can close roads, that would deliver a significant reduction in traffic, and clearly traffic performs like water. You close a road and it will find another route. So there's an awful lot of roads would need to close to reduce traffic levels to the level that we're aiming for. We've examined other charging options. So whether you significantly increase existing parking charges, whether you explore the workplace parking levy, so private business parking spaces are charged, and we've consulted on them. We've also undertaken technical evaluations that say, well, they don't deliver the reduction in traffic that we're looking to try and achieve, so we can create the space for the people walking and cycling, and that's the balance that we've done. Actually, we also considered different sizes of zones. So we considered a zone around the inner ring road, because you need to come up with zones that make sense. People can appropriately divert rather than doing U-turns in the road. We consulted on a smaller or a larger zone, and the popular view was actually they didn't prefer a smaller zone. And particularly with a smaller zone in Cambridge, what happens is a lot of the radial routes then get an awful lot more traffic. So Coldham's Lane, gets a lot more traffic, if that's even possible, given the traffic volumes on Coldham's Lane at the moment. But if you introduce an inner zone within Cambridge, Coldham's Lane, Newmarket Road, Madingley Road then takes significant increases in traffic. So this is a balance. We're out for consultation, and we very much welcome people's views on it, Chair.
I mean, that, because this question also had a reference to an increase in council tax. Is this something that has been considered? Is that even possible? Is that within the powers?
It's within. It's not within GCP's powers. It's within the powers of the respective council tax authorities, city, county council. I mean, there are some interesting equity issues around that, aren't there? In terms of charging more for council tax for users of public transport. But the real challenge, the technical challenge, is how that would reduce traffic levels, because you can't make buses better by just investing in them. We need investment, we need a lot better technology, a lot better vehicles, we need more of them. But we also need to create the space so they don't get caught in the same traffic as everybody else, because otherwise they're simply not going to be attractive. And a general increase in council tax isn't going to deliver a traffic reduction per se. So there's some of the challenges that we face. But actually the questioner does pick out the challenges of dealing with this sort of issue.
Thank you. There's a question too. What is the decision-making timeline for the STZ beyond the consultation? And there's no further information about this question, so that's it. What is the decision-making timeline for the STZ beyond the consultation?
So we're in the middle of a consultation. We've deliberately asked a series of open questions so people can give us a flavour of maybe what they like, what they don't like, what they would change. That is going to take a deal of time to review and analyse, but that richness is going to be really important for decision makers to understand going forward. So indicatively, we've said perhaps by the middle of 2023, we'll be in a position to have reviewed the consultation, to review all of these detailed comments and suggestions, and then to make recommendations or presentations to decision makers. But at the moment, Chair, there's no timeline beyond that.
Thank you very much. And in that case, I think we can let Councillor Slatter ask her question or even questions.
Thank you, and hello, Peter. We haven't met personally. Might see you again on the charities webinar on Friday. Happy with most of your answers, though I think maybe you don't realise just how many people didn't know the facts about the proposals before they heard the calls for a yes/no referendum, and that has caused councillors a tremendous amount of trouble trying to field the questions and the accusations and all sorts of things on email and social media and on the doorsteps, especially in Cambridge. So I want to reflect a bit of the flavour of the maelstrom I've been in the middle of. And the first one is to do with fairness, and I'll read it out so that you can have the hard copy if you want it. Many residents have asked why the current proposals for road charging do not include a discount for residents within the sustainable travel zone. If we are charged the full rate, I personally believe that this would be most damaging to families, community groups and sociable gatherings which benefit from daily short neighbourly trips, carrying passengers or loads which are ill-suited to buses or bikes. For example, younger children may not be able to join in sporting or other groups that are so important to their well-being. Isolated residents may get fewer local visitors, and volunteers may be less willing to give lifts or transport the equipment necessary for community events if such trips cost £5 each time. So the local discount, this has been quoted a lot with London as an example, that it just doesn't seem fair that Cambridge is paying for buses and others aren't.
You want me to respond?
Well, yes, I know you've said that these options have been considered, but of course, we as the decision makers are now faced with that, whereas other people were being faced with the academic interesting question.
Yeah, absolutely right. So I mean, clearly, I would say at the start, this is a consultation, and they're exactly the sort of views that we want to hear in terms of people's views on this, you know, for and against, and particularly the reasons why. Why are residents under the proposals being charged? The residents and postcodes within Cambridge generate 53% of the traffic on our roads.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah. And the challenge, therefore, is if there's a discount or exemption for residents, you're discounting or exempting over half the traffic. And if you're trying to, in particular, create space for people and walking and cycling and better bus services, that's a real tension. But we understand that, and that's why we're asking questions in the consultation, and we want to hear people's views.
Fine. So I think I am talking about the things that happen daily. I mean, it's particularly unpaid carers and those sort of neighbourly things that I would be sorry to see damaged, put it that way. Yeah.
And you've mentioned that we've got a forum with charities later this week. We've got another session with carers groups. So as well as the consultation, we're meeting with key stakeholders and key representative groups to try and understand what challenges or what issues or what benefits this might throw up, and that will add to the richness of information that we'll be providing to decision makers. We've also undertaken an impact assessment, so we're required to undertake an equalities impact assessment. We've gone much further than that. It's all published online that says these are the groups, these will be the benefits or the disbenefits, and that will continue. That work will continue, and that impact assessment will be updated as part of any final proposals in light of the consultation. So this richness and this valued contribution is going to be really important for decision makers to reflect upon if they take any final decisions.
Yes, and obviously we do have to make final decisions, and the equality impact, I've read it, is inevitably dealing with statistics and published information and data and so on, and councillors often deal with that tail, not the top of the normal curve, but that tail of the exceptions that test the rule. And none of us want to be voting for something that we know the day after there's a charge there will be a big problem for some individuals. We do need to be taking these into account and be seen to take them into account, because this must be by consent. That would be my point. Thank you. And you're saying things I thought you would say, and I've told people on the doorstep you will say, but I'm glad to hear it from you in terms of how much this will be taken into account. Am I allowed another one, Chair, or have we got some other?
Is there just one more?
It's a very straightforward, this one.
Okay, then in that case, please go ahead.
There's been a lot of discussion during the current conversation about the impact of road charging on small businesses and the self-employed. Is there a good case for vans to be charged at the same rate as cars? And we think that this should be seriously considered.
We've put out some proposals, because you have got to consult on proposals, and I think it's important. So I mean, you referred earlier on to the referendum and the yes no, which doesn't reflect the nature of the problem we've got. Our congestion and our growth means that traffic is going to get 20% worse over the next few years. Congestion will get 30% worse. There'll be more carbon in our environment, and the air quality. So this is not a zero-sum game. What we've got to do is to think of a variety of issues and a variety of proposals that form a package to deliver on this. We've put out an awful lot of detail, masses of detail on buses, a charging profile, as I said, discounts and exemptions, and we absolutely expect to take views on them. That's the nature of the consultation. So if people feel that actually the light van shouldn't be £10, it should be more than £5, then we want to hear that. If they feel that we should be exploring more on with larger vehicles, you know, how do we actively promote the movement to electric? We want to hear that, because that richness is going to make any final set of recommendations more reflective of our communities across Greater Cambridge, and that's going to be really important.
Thank you, and thank you very much.
Thank you. The next question comes from Councillor Davies.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Peter. I hope it's okay if I ask, I think it's 4 questions. So the first two relate to the biomedical campus specifically, which is obviously a big issue in my ward. From what I can tell from looking at the interactive journey planner that the GCP's put up, there will be of the order of 120 buses an hour in the peak, either going into or out of Cambridge Biomedical Campus. And I just wonder whether there is actually capacity on the campus to deal with those kinds of numbers, and if there isn't, what thinking's been done in terms of relocating the bus station or making other provision to accommodate those 120 buses, because that does seem like a significant number. The second, also related to the campus, is I know that one of the big themes of public concern has been about the inclusion of the campus in the charging zone. If it were to decided to remove the campus from the charging zone, would there be another round of consultation? Is there a scale of change which would merit another round of consultation? The third question is the 53% figure. I'm very interested in that because I share Councillor Slatter's concerns about the impact on societal life, if you like, societal trips as opposed to commuting trips. Do the GCP know how that 53% is distributed across the day? Is the majority of it commuting trips, or is it outside the peak hours? I think that would be interesting. And the fourth is about the distribution of revenue generated. So it seems to me that GCP is offering to do three things: to improve bus services, to improve active travel. I wonder if there's a third component, which is also all the supporting measures by way of things like better drainage systems, more bus shelters, better street lighting, and how you envisage funding being split across those three streams.
Wow. Okay. So let me have a bash. Biomedical campus, yeah, it is 100 buses an hour. That reflects the scale of the challenge in terms of gaining access to the biomedical campus. An awful lot of people try and get there. Parking is limited and expensive, and putting on a public transport offer is going to be incredibly important. Look, we're working with all of the key sites on what these proposals would mean. It would inevitably mean things like investment in new bus infrastructure, bus shelters, signalling systems to make sure that the capacity exists. But there would also be significantly less traffic on the roads. And so that in itself gives us significant opportunities. Recognizing particularly the high volume routes, then tap on, tap off contactless ticketing systems is important because that speeds up the journey experience. So we're confident that the capacity exists in the system, but that work will continue following any decision to progress, and I'm sure will continue for some period of time. In terms of what will and what won't, trigger another round of consultation, I'm not going to sort of speculate on that. We're in the middle of a consultation that's got a whole load of information out there, and I suspect if social media is anything to go by, we're going to get quite a wide range of views, and what we need to do is to get them to review, to analyse, and then present them to decision makers on what next steps would look like. We will have a split of your 53% figure, but Councillor Davis and Chair, if you don't mind, I'll have to go away and I'll provide a written answer as to what that looks like, because off the top of my head, I don't know. In terms of the distribution of revenue, the charging authority would be the county council. So the county council would determine how any revenue would ultimately be spent. Broadly, under these proposals, we generate about 60 to 70 million pounds per year. The public transport proposals are around 50 million pounds a year, and the addition we think would need to be spent in the walking, cycling improvements, and also, Councillor Davis, as you suggest, the improvements around public transport, so better and maintained bus shelters, real-time information that's updated, new ticketing technologies, and the like. But those would be considerations subject to any decision to progress. And again, that work would continue if any decision to move forward was taken. I hope that helps, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Now we are moving on to Cherry Hinton. Councillor Ashton.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Peter. We know congestion is not all day. So it would have been nice to have figures to show when congestion was at its peak. We know the peak times for congestion are school times, dropping off, picking up, and in the afternoons. So looking at times, it would have been good to have timings for when congestion is. We all know the fact when the schools are closed for the holidays, you can drive around Cambridge so much easily. So what would be done regards when those periods when there are no cars driving round? Congestion, are you saying there's no congestion at weekends? Because there's no charge for the weekends. Is the air cleaner at the weekends? Because you're saying we want cleaner and less congestion, yet the weekends are exempted. Yet most of us realise now that if you travel around Cambridge on a Saturday and Sunday, it's as bad, if not worse, than during the week. You mentioned about you had consultations earlier where you spoke to people. It would have been nice to have those, in a sense, to a wider audience, such as locally elected members, so you could have got our views. Improved bus services. Some of us would have liked to keep the old bus services that were taken away. And the proposed new services aren't improving us for Cherry Hinton. The one that was taken off of Colville Road is still not going back on. The express service that went from Tevisham down Coldham's Lane, down to the Beehive, to the Grafton, to the town centre and back again, is not coming back. The improved service, you will go down Coldham's Lane, you will get off at Sainsbury's, you will catch a bus up to Barnwell, you will get off at Barnwell, you will catch another bus at Barnwell to take you down Newmarket Road to get to the Beehive, and then repeat that again. Now, who is going to do the family shopping when you've got to do that? So again, it would have been nice to speak to people in the wards who know the bus services to ask exactly what bus services are needed and how often and when. So I think, yeah, consultation is the way to go, but I think we could have been a lot easier and smarter with the questions that we need to do. And again, we talk about London. Let's have a London system. And it winds people up because in London, they've got the underground, they've got a good rail service, they've got an amazing bus service. So we can't compare London and Cambridge unless we want to go back to James Palmer's idea and you tunnel under Cambridge and you give us an underground. Thank you.
To respond.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few comments there. So just in terms of the questions, actually, we've published information on congestion. We've done that previously. Interestingly, what congestion happens around peak hours is peak hours grow. And what is happening post-pandemic, obviously the motor car is coming faster than any other modes. We're seeing growth on our strategic network associated with the A14, higher levels than we've ever had. And what's happening is the congestion is moving and traffic levels are moving into the off-peak. Clearly, as I was talking earlier on, we're looking at 20% more traffic over the next few years, 30% more congestion. Well, that more then takes out any benefits around schools. So what we're going to have is significantly more congestion across our city network for much longer periods than just the sort of the school environments. I mean, if you think you want charging weekends, obviously, you know, that's for you to respond to. I think we've tried to come up with a balanced package, recognising the question we had earlier on about the impact on residents. So we've suggested not weekends. Pardon me. And then a sort of final one about the buses. there are significant improvements to the buses in the Cherry Hinton area. But if we've not got it right, or we've not gone far enough, we've put out a massive information about these bus services, an interactive journey planner and things like that. And if we've not gone far enough, we want to hear people's views to say, actually, we need more direct services, or we don't want to do a change. That's exactly the nature of the consultation that we're undertaking at the moment. And we are looking for an amazing bus network in our area. I mean, if people want to call it London style or not, that's fine. We want an amazing bus network that serves all of the requirements of our growing area for years to come. And that's what we're trying to achieve in this consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Peter. Would you like to follow up on that, Councillor Ashton, or can I hand over to Councillor Macpherson?
Yeah, just a quick question. Cherry Hinton, I live less than 5 minutes from the A14, and I have to travel to my family who live in the north of England, and I'm actually in Rutland now because of childmind for my daughter. So I don't put any congestion into Cambridge whatsoever, because I'm driving the completely opposite way where there is no traffic. And yet under these proposals, I would have to pay £5 to go and do those things. And my family to visit me would have to pay £5. Can that be right, where you're on the outskirts of the city and you're paying a congestion charge when you're actually driving away and taken away from congestion?
People drive to and from, don't they? That's the nature of a commute or a journey to school or college or anything else. Look, we've got to draw a boundary to do these things. We've drawn a boundary based on technical review and based on consultation previously. But we're out for a consultation, and we very much welcome people's views on it.
Councillor Macpherson, please.
Hello, Peter. Thank you for joining us. Brave man. Mark has just asked my first question. I've got 4 questions, but they're relatively simple now, Peter, because we've been dancing around them. So that was one of my first questions, because a lot of people have said that we're literally a mile or less from the A14, and I heard your response there, but I'm sorry, it's not a good enough response. My ward members wouldn't accept that. It's just a nonsense when you're leaving the city. So I just don't believe that response adequately answers that. When you're leaving the city, you've got nothing to do with adding so-called congestion to the city or pollution or movement or anything else. It's a nonsense to be charging people to leave the city. I'm sorry, but that's the way our ward members feel. And so do we. The charging zone is far too wide for those reasons that have been cited, so I won't say any more about that. The second question I've got, I've been asked to ask this specifically, but I'll first make a declaration. I myself are a lifetime motorcyclist, have been for best part of 50 years before I ask this question. But it's come up from a number of people over the last couple of days, and it centres around a statement I've got here that was posted on Facebook. Now, it may or may not be accurate, but a lot of people, including myself, have found this a little bit disconcerting when somebody challenged charging motorcycles, which are in fact a third the size of a car anyway, so the congestion is really a moot point there. It says here that, now this may be wrong, Peter, so that's fine, so I can only reiterate what I've got here. And it says that your response was that we are proposing to charge the same as cars, as we are prioritising active modes and bus. Doesn't make a good English, but that's what it says. We are, and this is a bit that I think has upset a lot of people, we are also keen to avoid anything that could encourage a relative shift in terms of uptake of mopeds, motorcycles, as government data shows they are significantly less safe than other modes and also more polluting. Additionally, encouraging an uptake would increase noise and pollution within the city. I have to tell you, that's upset a lot of people, and that's a very discriminatory remark about two-wheeled vehicles, and that's not gone down well. And quite honestly, they only take up a third of the space of a car, and it's not true to say that they're more polluting. Mine certainly isn't, and noise-wise, you wouldn't be able to hear mine if you stood 10 paces away from it. So a lot of us don't understand that. and that's whipped up an awful lot of upset. But I know that you're meeting somebody Wednesday, I think, about that. So I guess that will be covered. I'm soon done. And again, I'll make a declaration here. This is about emergency volunteers. Now, I'm a community first responder. Now, I can get called at any time, as can my fellow community first responders. When we don't drive marked vehicles, although we can have stickers and so forth on them. So if I get called, which I was only yesterday, if I get called from here to the other end of Cherry Hinton as an emergency volunteer, is that going to cost me or other volunteers £5 to do that? Or are we going to have some convoluted system where we then have to justify why we were doing that? And my final point was that lots of people said, you mentioned about recruiting extra bus drivers. Well, we haven't got the bus drivers to drive the buses we've got now. And that's been well publicised. So I'd be interested to know, and my ward members will be interested to know how a recruiting drive for bus drivers would actually work and how would it be successful. So thank you for that. That's me done.
Yes, please respond.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. I think a few comments at the start, then we got on to motorcycles. I don't believe I've ever publicly said emissions and safety. I do know the Department for Transport have a view on it. We have raised how do we get the balance right between motorised modes, active travel modes and people. And yes, we are out to consultation on proposals that charge. But as you say, as I've said earlier on, we're in consultation. And as you suggested, I am meeting motorcycle groups later this week. So we're in listening mode on what those proposals are. Your emergency volunteers, your community first responders, I think is something we want to look at, and we'd like to hear more about that, because that clearly is something that we would want to support rather than otherwise, and not with a convoluted system. There are very elegant solutions in terms of dealing with this nowadays. Recruiting drivers is an important one, because what we're looking at is a long-term investment plan for the bus network that doesn't exist at the moment. So there's not been significant investment in electric vehicles, other than the investment the GCP is putting in and now working with the Mayoral Combined Authority, more electric vehicles for the park and ride services. So that investment's not there. We need more investment in a long-term training and recruitment plan for drivers. We need more depot capacity. We need more investment in terms of charging infrastructure for those new electric vehicles. This isn't going to happen at the drop of a hat, and it's not going to happen unless someone steps in and does something about it. And what we're suggesting is, as part of these proposals, we need that long-term investment plan that encompasses all aspects of public transport provision. Driver recruitment, retention and training is got to be key part of that, and that needs public sector investment and involvement rather than just leaving it to the private bus operators, because of the challenges that they face at the moment on a very fragile bus network. There's been a lot of service reductions in our area, and indeed wider Cambridgeshire. The Mayor and the Combined Authority have stepped in on a short-term basis, but those reductions have happened across the UK given the fragility of the bus network. And what we're suggesting is long-term investment is required, and that's revenue investment, so that's year in, year out, which is why we need that sustainable fund. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Can I just come back on that a moment, Chair?
Oh yes, sorry, your hand is still up. Yes, thank you, of course.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry, Peter. What you said at the start there was that I started with some comments. No, it was slightly more than that. I started with an actual statement. So you went straight onto the motorcycles, but didn't cover the first bit. So I want to bounce back to that. They weren't just comments. These are observations from our residents. The charging zone is far too wide. It wasn't just chat. That was the statement. The charging zone is far too wide. For residents to be travelling within their own wards and to travel less than a mile to the A14 to be charged, or potentially charged, I know it's in consultation at the moment, but if they were potentially charged to leave the city, as Mark said, leave the potential congestion area, how can that be right? So it wasn't just talk, that was an actual question.
Apologies, Councillor McPherson. I thought that was a statement rather than a question. But look, as I've said earlier on, we've consulted on different sizes of zone. People preferred a larger zone rather than a smaller zone during previous consultations, and that's why you have consultations. So we've gone through that process. Anybody on the network under the current proposals, 7 AM to 7 PM, may well be charged. And that's what we're out in terms of consultation. There will be a whole host of boundary issues. I live close to it. I live just the other side of it. What about people parking at the boundary? And you know, that's an awful lot of information that I expect to hear. And we need to come up with some proposals to reflect any concerns that are raised. That's the very nature of a consultation. But it's also the nature of a consultation such as this, that not everybody's going to agree. They may well agree to say, well, we do need that better bus network and we need more space for people, but we don't necessarily agree about how it's going to happen, because there's no easy solutions here. But if I take you back to the challenge we've got, whereby traffic is going to get a lot worse, our contribution to the climate is going to get worse as a result. The air quality problem that we have in our city environment is acute at times, and so we need to find a package of ways of doing that. But I would draw you back to, we are consulting. So by the very nature of consultation, we're listening. I've come along to this meeting. We've gone to an awful lot of meetings. Not everybody agrees with the package that we've put out, but we want people's views. We don't just want yes or no. We want, well, no, because of this reason, or yes, because of this reason, or maybe if you reviewed the bus service option that you've got in my patch. That's the nature of the consultation we're undertaking at the moment, and we very much welcome everybody's views.
Okay, thank you very much for all that, Peter. Thank you.
Maybe just to comment on that. I mean, maybe one thing about the consultation is, I mean, people are not faced with different options. They look at one option and then they are trying to figure out what to do with it. I mean, it could potentially have simplified things if there had been options like these are the different sizes of the STZ that would make it viable. This is one way to get 50 million. This is another way to get 50 million, and so on and so forth. I think this would have made it much easier for people to actually realize it's a consultation where, what you can make a decision about, rather than feeling that people have to go against something, even if they are not necessarily well informed. But I mean, I guess that has shaped the debate, and is probably very hard once the debate is so emotional to move it back into a more, into calmer waters. Anyway, that was just a comment. Councillor Flobert had her hand up, which is gone now. So is there still a hand by Councillor Flobert?
Hello, Peter. I just basically, because all of you mentioned what I was going to ask, I just decided to lower my hand, but just briefly to say thank you very much for that presentation, and just maybe go through to the concern that we have with the recruitment, the drivers' recruitment. I mean, I have to say I've been in this country about 20 years, and I can see that in certain professions, there is a lack of people who want to do those jobs. And those are nursing, doctors, teachers, and there is a huge investment on trying to recruit people to want to do these professions. And I have to say the government hasn't been successful. So I'm afraid that your answer about investing more in getting drivers, it's not enough. This is a very important point. If you don't have drivers, you won't have anyone to drive, and therefore people will have to use their cars, but they still will be charged. And this is something that you definitely must consider. And then the other sort of point, maybe if I might say, is that how prepare. I know that you mentioned at the beginning that this wasn't a referendum, but people feel a little bit very much like it. They feel that whatever they answer, you will actually go ahead with this, with these plans. And maybe it would be good to know from you how prepared are you to go ahead with this without a broad consent from the general public? And then in terms of marketing, I have to say that I use the public transport quite a lot, and I go to places like the library. I have children, and the information is very limited. I haven't seen that information. I know that you say that you are, newspapers. I think people need more information. People need to be informed. If you want to take them on board and not do this just, in a sort of compulsory way. They want to people and all of us, I guess, we want to know that you going to take us into consideration and not just doing what you say you're going to do it because it's good for all of us, which is, in principle, is good. We all agree, but there are so many things that at the moment we just not sure about, and these are the things that I think you should be addressing. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to respond straight away?
Yeah. Fine. Thank you, Councillor Flo. But I mean, in the first instance, I won't be deciding anything. I'm an officer who undertakes the technical work, supports consultations, and I will pull together reports to decision makers. And I think what the decision makers are reflecting here is this is a really big challenge. And we're not the only area looking at it, and there's no easy wins. If we ask people, do they want a better bus service, then most people will say, yes, they do. But then if you get into the detail of what that requires, it does require investment. I've been dealing with buses for 30 years, and there's a challenge in our geography and in other geographies across the UK at the moment, in that if we want a bus service that we could use as a genuine alternative to the car, then money needs to be put in from somewhere. And I think your first contributor was suggesting council tax, but money's got to come from somewhere. And what we're trying to pull together is a balanced package of proposals to say how we can go about addressing our problem. Driver recruitment will be a key part of that. It will be a key part of a long-term investment program. There's no magic wand that says in day one things will improve. What I tried to outline in my presentation is to say that we're looking at 3 to 4 years implementation. We can reduce fares on day one, and then we need to make sure that we bring in other elements of that significantly improved bus network. The last time I looked, 11,000 people had responded to the consultation. So there's quite a lot of information out there. There's certainly information in all of the libraries, and we're doing an awful lot of public events, handing out leaflets, radio interviews, as well as meetings like this. So I think it does feel like the talk of the city at the moment. Whether you like or you dislike, there's certainly a high level of understanding in terms of what we're talking about at the moment. We've got another 4 weeks left of the consultation, and for you and for the other people who are watching your meeting this evening, I would just encourage you to take part, to consider the challenge that we've got, to consider there's no simple solution. We've put out a massive information, 44 bus maps we've put out, and they might not all be right according to your local views and your local circumstances. So tell us which bits you like, tell us which bits you don't like, and give us your views on the consultation proposals. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments or questions? I mean, actually remembered I had a question from a resident specifically about the estimate or the effect of the STZ on footfall in the city centre, which I think the assumption is that better public transport might actually increase it. So the question, of course, is there a lot of dark matter around people who at the moment simply cannot get into the city centre because they don't have a car, they don't want a car, they can't drive? Would they go with better public transport? I mean, is there actually sort of an educated guess? Has this been assessed as part of the business case? Because when I looked at the supporting documents, I couldn't find it.
Yeah, it has been assessed. Yeah, the estimates is that would increase footfall. Obviously, people coming in by different modes, public transport, and particularly walking and cycling for journeys. But that information we will continue to review, and we'll present to decision makers as part of any final set of recommendations.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Ashton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Peter, I don't know if it comes under your remit, but I've heard that Stagecoach dramatically changed the terms and conditions for the drivers, which would time with the fact why all of a sudden they found themselves in a bit of a pickle. So I've heard on the grapevine that they used to do 4 days on, 4 days off, and because they weren't, shall we say, as was pointed out earlier, the pay wasn't fantastic. They put up with that because it was 4 days on, 4 days off. And my understanding is now is they've gone to shift work. And a lot of the drivers, and I've heard just 4 to 5 drivers a week are leaving. So as quick as new drivers are coming in, they still can't catch up with what they've got. So I was wondering whether or not, you could either confirm they've changed their terms and conditions, or as was asked earlier, how is Stagecoach looking at improving the terms and conditions to recruit more drivers? Thank you.
Councillor Ashton, it's probably not for me to confirm or deny the private matters of the bus company. I'm sure if you approach them, the managing director, who's a terribly engaging fellow, will just give you a straight answer on that side of things. I do know that they are actively engaged in recruiting more drivers, but at the same time, we are experiencing problems across our network, aren't we? And your constituents and your residents are experiencing that on a daily basis. And together, we need to try and make a better bus network.
Thank you very much. I mean, will the GCP actually commit to a certain, let's say, performance level and say really only if we have reached this level of, frequency of services, this number of buses, so on and so forth, or this level of active infrastructure, then we will introduce the congestion charge. Because at the moment it looks like, yes, they will do, step 1, step 2, but what if something happens during step 1, during year 1 or year 2 on the way to the congestion charge? I mean, will there be a clear performance indicator, a level specified that is, okay, only if we reach this, and if it takes 1, 2 or 5 years, doesn't matter, but only then will we introduce the congestion charge?
If there was a decision to progress on this, I would imagine there's a whole host of information and details will be contained in that. So the forward funding, the GCP Executive Board has nominally identified £50 million to forward fund the improvements. That would need to be in there. Exactly what the final network pattern for bus services looks like would need to be in there. Firmer commitments on the on the walking and cycling improvements. So I'd imagine there's an awful lot of information would need to be part of any final decision. But at the moment, Chair, we're in a consultation as to whether or not decision makers should do this. We've put out a massive information, and I think the point of this evening, which has been, I think, very engaging, but also the wider consultation, is to really listen to people's views, to try and rationalise, review, and then come forward with a sort of reflection of what those have been, and that I then present to decision makers for them to reflect on further.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I don't see any more yellow hands. Is there anything in? Okay, there's a real hand, Councillor McPherson. No. Is there anything in the Democratic Services mailbox? Okay, because it's 9 o'clock now, so unless, okay, Councillor Ashton, the last word.
Yeah, just a quick one, Peter. Park and ride sites. How are we going to manage the park and ride sites? Because obviously they're in the travel zone. So if my family want to come and see me, and you say use the park and ride to save your cost, they couldn't do it because they're still going to have a cost.
Park and ride sites aren't in the travel zone. You'd be able to travel to the park and ride for free. And also we're putting a lot more spaces, a lot more capacity in the park and ride sites. So we've got plans for 10,000 additional spaces to give people that opportunity in terms of travelling to and around the city.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've reached the end of this discussion. I think it's been a very lively and good discussion. Thank you very much, Peter, for joining the cross-examination here.
Yeah, thank you.
I think you've also got some ideas. You can also take some ideas away from this. I mean, we definitely will. And I guess the discussion will continue, and I guess councillors will have to deal with it in the next election. What fun. So Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us tonight, for contributing, also for listening. Thank you to the residents who joined us online. And I hope to see you all again at the next South Area Committee meeting. I think that means we can go offline then.
Thanks, Olaf.